good morning, good afternoon, and of course a very good evening to wherever in the world you may be. Now, considering the date, I want this video to be my contribution on the result of the UK leaving the European Union. And after much anticipation, surprise, surprise, it seems we are having a delay until May the 22nd, I believe it was, so long as our Parliament agree to a deal. So why is this? Now, I did cover some information, I believe, regarding Brexit in a previous video roughly a year ago. Well, even 2 years on, people are still moaning about us leaving the EU on both sides. The people who want to leave have given up hope, and this isn't helped at all by the fact being we have a Prime Minister amongst others who are prioritising what the EU wants over our own. Now, especially when considering the result of the vote. The referendum has somewhat divided the country, even though you wouldn't think we could divide ourselves any more than we already have done over recent years, despite us being oh so multicultural. It has divided Europe also, and despite the support the UK has had for leaving, our MPs are still pushing to remain, naturally. Now, little do people know that there was a debate on leaving the EU in 1975, asking the question, should we stay in the European Common Market? So, only 2 years after the UK first joined, and the vote majority was yes, well, it shows how uncertain many people must have felt, going as far back as over 40 years ago. Then in 1984, Margaret Thatcher demanded, and negotiated, the UK pays less into the EU budget since we didn't have the same benefits as others. So not much changes there, of course. She reduced it by 8%, which is still in place today. 1993 was the major year for change, when the EU was established as we know it today, and the participating countries agreed to shared political, economical and foreign policy. This is what enabled free movement of immigrants and the EU to dictate our laws to better suit themselves over the years. Now, the EU have mistreated the UK. For example, there was lengthy bans on beef products, as in recent years, due to mad cow disease, despite other countries having shorter length bans. That's just one example. There was even a ban on selling English chocolate because it apparently contains too much milk and must be sold as a chocolate substitute. They seem to put on restrictions just for the sake of it, is basically what I'm saying. Little pernickety things that they just want to moan about. And funny enough, most of those restrictions seem to only be thrown at the UK when you look into it. Now, it was in 2007 when things really changed in the EU. The saggy flannel that is, of course, Gordon Brown signed the Lisbon Treaty on behalf of the UK, which donated a lot of our powers and other countries' powers to the EU, leaving Gordon Brown one of the most hated Prime Ministers of recent times, with the EU having less powers over the UK. Less EU costs had negotiated the beginnings of Brexit, you might say. The idea behind Brexit in the beginning was from Cameron, wanting to reduce the deficit by paying out less money to other countries, along with other reasons such as lack of law control, the public's view on immigration and restrictions and benefits to EU citizens, etc., etc. Now, it is important to note here how the Conservative PMs Margaret Thatcher and David Cameron did more to reduce power to the EU, whilst Labour's Tony Blair and Gordon Brown did more to give power to the EU. It's noteworthy of the two political parties' involvement in the EU and the different sides they take during the Brexit process. Now, on the 23rd of June, 71.8% of registered voters turned up, a bigger turnout than the general election. Now, 51.9% voted to leave, which instructed Theresa May to trigger Article 50 of the EU Treaty to leave the constituency. Well, so that just puts that into perspective anyway, so there's a quick history and fact check of the UK in the EU. Of course, it goes a little deeper than that, but It's all hearsay, much of it, and of course, what isn't you can always look into yourself. Now, I think it is important to get people to understand some of the facts and social aspects of all the goings-on with Brexit, considering how long and drawn-out the process has been. I mean, good God, man, 1/3 of blitzed buildings in the UK was rebuilt within 12 months of World War II ending, and today MPs can't even agree to a simple bloody leave agreement. That, up to yet, has dragged itself out for over 2 years. Now, the subject is also confusing when you consider all the different stories the MPs tell the media, how the media perceive and broadcast what they want in the contents they want it, and how both sides of the pond give out false information. Now, what people on all sides can't seem to do is accept the fact that the majority have had a say and want to leave. So that being said, I've tried to simplify the whole matter somewhat, purely to help many people gain a better understanding of what has exactly gone on within the last 2 years and prior in regards to making sense of the deliberately overcomplicated mess that is bloody Brexit. And to do so, I broke it down considerably. Here I present to you the Brexit 5 stages of acceptance.
Anger.
Oh yes, people are angry. People are very angry we are leaving. People are also angry that we could be staying in the EU longer. The public are angry at the MPs. Well, the MPs are angry at the Prime Minister. The EU is angry with the UK. The UK is angry with the EU. People who don't care are angry about hearing it all the while. Everybody's angry. One of the things that get me really angry is how we seem to forget our heritage when it comes to these matters. Most people in Europe and the UK will have had relatives give their lives to fight for freedom in World War II. The UK openly declared war on Germany to prevent them from invading us after they overtook France, Belgium and Poland. So in turn we fought for their freedom as well. And now these same countries are trying to take our powers from us. These countries wouldn't even exist today and would have fell to Nazism if it wasn't for the UK, amongst other help. And I don't care who wants to debate it, as I've got the facts stored to detail right here in my topper. The other major reason people are angry is how the public feel betrayed by their freedom, right to democracy. We have voted unanimously to leave, and yet we are represented by a Remain government. It seems to be forgotten that Theresa May was a Remainder. So she isn't going to want to secure a hard Brexit no deal. Same for her second-in-command Philip Hammond. It is also noted of how May kept in her cabinet a select amount of Remainders, including Amber Rudd and Greg Clark, to name a couple, who both campaigned for a delay on the Brexit debate. This was quickly shot down by Andrea Leadsom, who called them appalling and disloyal. And that's exactly the point. The MPs take on their roles and are known as public servants. They are meant to represent the public's majority opinion and uphold that opinion in Parliament when considering new laws and changes. However, Brexit has proven all too well to how the MPs only consider themselves and their opinion, not the public's. Unless, of course, you're a wealthy, brain-dead, blind-sided arse-scallop who, of course, contributes nothing practical to any given topic of debate on the matter. But as always, you can't speak against the will of the people of power. They'll get upset and shit over your community and protest against you thinking you're allowed to have an opinion. Because God knows, we're not allowed to challenge them with rational thoughts.
You want to know how?
Another angry argument is how much Theresa May is agreeing to the conditions of the EU terms, and once again seems to be putting Britain on a backbench instead of fighting for her country. Of course, this can all fall into the points mentioned just now about her being a backwards remaining split-arse. The UK joined the EU in 1973, so when we leave, you would think we could leave with everything we went in with. It's not much to ask for, is it? Well, this is where Mrs. May's deal failed to impress, as one agreement with the EU was to sign over some of our fishing seas to the EU border around France. To put it simply, If it was ours to begin with, it should be ours when we leave. Makes more sense, doesn't it, you would think, rather than basically selling over our waters to Europeans to fish from, and then sell us back their catch of the day at a higher price. So yes, the economical impact would be huge, as Britain would lose fishing export trade and the public lose jobs. Thankfully this has since been revised and renegotiated, but it was a waste of time going back over the agreement when she could have just said no to begin with. But once again, as I say, it's basically to take up time deliberately. There is also the issue of the 39 billion we should supposedly pay the EU based on our imports and exports. This is all very well, but when you consider that we pay 13 billion into the EU budget, shouldn't we also be getting that money back? But let's face it, the platform that gets everybody angry is the media. I swear to God, those people. If you could call them people. You have to be careful which papers you read to get the right information. Now, I generally tend to go through all papers anyway, for the most part, just to crisscross what I believe is right and what is wrong in regards to what's being fed to the public. But you see, papers such as the Daily Express and the Daily Mail encourage us on most parts to leave. They have a tendency to focus on issues with the public which seem concerned about, such as topics, say, of immigration and the basic terms of the withdrawal agreement. Meanwhile, Daily Mirror and the Financial Times mainly report for a Remain perspective, with them urging us to agree to what the EU wants. Now, papers taking sides is not necessarily a bad thing. As I just said, it gives a broad opinion and perspective, I suppose, on where things stand. After all, they do have an audience to appeal to, but what does confuse matters is that the majority of papers reported on different issues from both sides. Instead of reporting on one thing and giving a mixed opinion, they would report on several articles just to get the EU or the UK perspective, and this leads to persuading readers into either a leave or remain process of thought that can in many ways be drilled into the mind via exaggerations, as shown in a study done by Oxford University in late February, I think it was 2019 this year. Of course, this is nothing new, I know, and I have made numerous mentions on numerous occasions about the media being used as a mind control tool, essentially. It doesn't mean that it doesn't still piss me off, though, I have to say. Anyway, and then there is also our good old friends, sticking with the media, the BBC. Now, according to a YouGov poll, over half of Brexit leavers believe the BBC is biased on the referendum in favour of remaining. I think anyone who argues it isn't has probably undergone a lobotomy and isn't even aware of that either. One clear case of this is the BBC turning a blind eye to the likes of Gary Lineker, the main star of Tim Burton's upcoming new film. They do like using dim-witted celebrities to push their agenda, don't they? But yes, Lineker. Now, he made a point of tweeting on how we need to get the best outcome with our neighbours, amongst other such tweets that pure and simply put down people whom wish to come out of the EU. You know, it's this type of spouting that, once again, is trying to pull people onto a side, so to speak, that doesn't even necessarily have to be there. It's just competitive ping-ponging across a table. Either way, I'll never eat Walker's Crisps again. McCoy is all the way. Anyway, The Guardian also tells of how the BBC has restricted presenters on political shows to not give their opinion and only that of the BBC. So why was the likes of Lineker excluded from this rule? Because it favoured them, of course. Another report from Civitas monitored the BBC's Radio 4's guests, which discussed the EU. Now, of the 4,275 that were on there, only 125 were clearly for leave. Now, some marginalisation there, I'd say. This is also supported by statistics that only 9 in 97 interviews conducted by the Today programme in 1 month between October and November of 2017 had guests which supported the Leave campaign. It's also fair to say that the people in Labour and Conservatives are at loggerheads as to who wants to leave and who wants to remain. It's also more confusing when Jeremy Corbyn of the Labour Party voted to leave the EU in 1975, but it is reported that other senior Labour shadow MPs want to leave the EU. They just support the Remain policy, or at least a second referendum for the happiness of the voters. Same for the Conservatives, David Cameron and other senior MPs who wanted out of the EU, hence the referendum happened in the first place. But when it came to campaigning, Cameron sided with the Remain, as that was the stance with the most of his party, basically. Now, school ground playgroups, basically. Who's the most popular? That's all it really comes down to. There's also anger over the unclear financing in regards to the EU budget and what will happen with our EU contribution. Now, Philip Hammond already announced that Britain will continue finance for any EU endorsements for at least a year after Brexit, and then there's the taxes we pay that goes to the EU. Will the UK government just be keeping that, or will our tax contributions decrease? I bet I can take a guess at which way that'll go, and I don't need to be a psychic to do so. Funny though how they are always happy to take more and more of taxpayers' hard-earned money away from them, but of course find the time to give themselves a £2,000 a year rise.
Well, first of all, there's 17 cents new in town tax. Then there's 45 cents rowboat under the wharf tax and $1 leaving your junk lying around the wharf tax. So altogether, you owe the Commodore $1.87.
Who's this Commodore?
That's the nature of a question. There's a nickel question tax.
Oh, forget it.
There needs to be more transparency with these things, as it's the British taxpayer who funds the country. And then there was the news release in January, again I think it was, of how the EU has told the UK it will still have to make payments up until 2023 to help maintain jobs in areas such as agriculture. Oh my god, this is utter rubbish.
Denial.
Out means out. We won't be having any benefit from the EU after that date, so why should we keep paying? And in regard to agriculture, what bloody agriculture? We're destroying more and more greenbelt with each passing year. As I said, it's a load of rubbish. Denying the truth to the public should be a criminal offence, in my opinion. It's unfair that MPs and the media are able to distort facts so much that they are no longer factual. But what am I saying? There will be no one in power left. Anyway, before the vote and after the vote, there has been a lot of uneducated facts thrown about to persuade votes one way or another. One claim made by many was the British pound would collapse and become worthless due to the loss of trade and immediate cut of ties with a no-deal Brexit. However, since Brexit, the pound has got stronger as more countries want to deal with the UK. In May 2016, just after the vote, the pound was worth €1.3, whilst on the 9th of March it was worth €1.33. And while this is only a small increase, it still displays confidence in the UK economy. But of course, they don't tell you that in many mainstream media outlets, do they?
Lies. Oh, lies!
There was also the denial of the UK fishing trade. Now, I know I've already touched on this, but the papers started saying of how the fishing industry will be killed off after Brexit if we leave, as there will be more competition for fish in the seas between the UK and the French border. It was meant to get so fierce that the papers even had images and interviews and so on with French fishermen ready to kill English fishermen over who got the bloody fish. Well, firstly, the fish are living creatures in their natural environment. They're not owned by anyone. Secondly, the EU and the UK have already made agreements as to where the fishing border lies, and the UK fishing boats can still enter EU waters for months after Brexit, as the fishing industry in the EU isn't strong enough to sustain the fishing demand. Doesn't that just say something in itself? This is backed by the UK selling 66% of all its fishing exports to the EU. Now, the EU won't want to lose this trade and have a fish shortage, so they already have a deal in place that financially benefits the UK. They haven't exactly broadcast that either, have they? Another claim is that the border shutdown will cause miles of traffic, as lorries crossing the channel will need to be investigated more thoroughly. This has led to claims that there will be a constant 13-mile traffic jam of lorries that will take 4 years to clear.
What a load of old shit.
Foremost, the date of the shutdown doesn't automatically mean that all lorries going to and fro will be transporting goods illegally. There will be different custom agreements, but again, there will be a deal to handle this more efficiently so both sides don't lose money. It was also reported that France has imposed a 2-week delay on all lorry drivers leaving to go into the UK. Well, that is also a load of tripe. Why, oh god, why would France pay the expenses of a UK lorry driver for 2 weeks to stay in their country and further delay the exports of goods?
I could spend the rest of my life having this conversation. Please try to understand before one of us dies.
What if they were transporting fresh fruit? That wouldn't last 2 weeks in a heated up lorry now, would it? So it just takes half a brain to realise the truth from the lies, and yet so many people are easily misled. And another claim I would just like to mention is that the American Council of Health and Science has also claimed that Brexit will kill off 12,000 Britons. Yes, they actually made this claim. This is due to fruit and vegetables becoming more expensive. Not quite sure how the EU food taxes will no longer apply, therefore making food cheaper. They have even calculated how more men will die than women. Again, not quite sure as to why, and if there's no logical reason, which there isn't, as they didn't really elaborate, then it's stupid. Simple. I just wanted to touch on that. Apparently it's had some people actually concerned. Anyway, we also have the people who deny the result of Brexit, and deny that Brexit is an event that will happen.
I seek justice! Denied!
Yes, believe it or not, news reports seem to be putting more time into the people who originally claimed they voted leave and now want to remain in an attempt to sway voters. Now, Sean O'Grady writes for the independent newspaper and should be just that independent and not take sides. Except for this article. He claims that people won't be able to afford the effects after Brexit. He states that Boris Johnson is a remainder despite all his campaigns to leave, and forwards the idea that millions of people regret voting for leave without any facts or figures to support this or back it up in any way. Now, additionally, in June 2016, 1 month after the vote, the Metro reported on how 1 million voters regretted voting leave. Well, how? 1 month later, nothing really happened. Theresa May started touring England, Wales and Scotland to find out what the councils wanted out of Brexit. Nothing was even arranged with the EU at this point as such. It just seemed to be exactly what I said it was. Another ploy to get people to deny leaving is an option.